Merceline went from 420 to 429. Ben Mertens is still at 32. Jake the Dog went from 40 to 46. Ice King went from 78 to 85. Princess Bubblegum went from 33 to 34. Humpy Space Princess went from 74 to 80. Lady Raincorn went from 419 to 404. Emo went from 26 to 27. The Common DeLorean went from 20 to 22. The Rare went from 46 to 42. Ultra Rare went from 239 to 211. Marty's Hoverboard went from 59 to 65. Pitbull Hoverboard went from 161 to 175. Question Mark went from 42 to 66. No Tag went from 15 to 17. Rising Sun went from 23 to 28. Eduardo Rizzo went from 3,400 to 3,200. Joe Madureira went from 290 to 233. Becky Cloonan went from 395 to 398. Todd McFarlane went from 799 to 760. Jim Lee the Joker went from 253 to 258. Infantino went from 940 to 930. Sprang the Joker went from 282 to 285. Jason Fabek went from 105 to 118. Sprang Batman went from 105 to 106. Ryan Boland Penguin went from 379 to 350. Amanda Connor Batman went from 699 to 710. Bruce Timm Harley Quinn went from 212 to 214. Jim Lee Nightwing went from 985 to 980. Jay Lee Batman went from 220 to 225. Gary Frank Batman went from 110 to 115. Darwin Cookie went from 49 to 43. Greg Capullo Batman went from 41 to 43. Frank Quitley Robin went from 43 to 49. Capit Crusader Batman went from 70 to 74. Mike Mignolia Batman went from 289 to 366. Big Bada went from 900 to 949. Death went from 413 to 455. Harley Quinn Deluxe 2 went from 178 to 176. Starfire went from 960 to 939. Honeybud went from 235 to 245. Count Calorie went from 350 to 415. Bad Tony went from 53 to 77. Captain Cornstarch went from 72 to 112. Twilight Mothman went from 19 to 20. Bigfoot is still at 14. Yeti went from 13 to 14. Nightcrawler went from 45 to 55. Thunderbird went from 50 to 52. Nessie went from 12 to 13. Chupacabra went from 14 to 13. Jersey Devil went from 25 to 24. Mothman is still at 23. Ogopogo went from 46 to 55. Cthulhu went from 29 to 30. Cosmic Cthulhu went from 289 to 293. Mera went from 80 to 95. Supergirl went from 518 to 488. Catwoman went from 50 to 53. Batgirl is still at 41. Gold Pink went from 75 to 89. Silver Gold went from 1900 to 2000. Silver went from 565 to 540. Silver Black went from 255 to 234. Choice Cuts went from 41 to 48. Backstab went from 984 to 1100. Visible Neon went from 200 to 271. Red went from 99 to 124. Visible went from 177 to 230. Happy Stage went from 37 to 50. The Common Actor 1 went from 39 to 38. The Rare went from 75 to 79. The Ultra Rare is still at 290. Logo Platinum went from 10,200 to 12,000. Logo went from 290 to 367. Ghost Trap is still at 730. Stay Puft Marshmallow Man went from 211 to 205. Slimer went from 88 to 90. Collective Logo went from 233 to 230. Givenchy Beauty went from 1700 to 1400. Emilia Earhart went from 688 to 685. Cleopatra went from 930 to 900. Terry Dodson went from 1500 to 1600. Steve Puck went from 6500 to 7000. Gillimarch went from 290 to 340. Webstar went from 348 to 365. Gelatina is still at 12. Marina went from 17 to 18. Tropicana is still at 50. Perla went from 19 to 18. Maria is still at 22. Oceania is still at 12. Irina went from 11 to 12. Cora is still at 13. Corsica went from 194 to 205. Superman went from 610 to 588. Mayor of Townsville went from 408 to 395. Buttercup went from 75 to 73. Blossom went from 60 to 65. Mojo Jojo went from 136 to 140. Donny went from 41,000 to 39,900. Bubbles went from 1,400 to 1,600. Professor Utonium is still at 1,800. Him went from 4,000 to 4,400. Alex Ross is still at 49. John Tyler went from 640 to 625. Scotty Young went from 47 to 50. Ed McGuinness went from 33 to 38. Adi Granov went from 93 to 90. Yuji Kaida went from 48 to 49. Ultraman went from 54 to 55. Ultraman 7 went from 85 to 90. Ultraman Ace went from 293 to 295. Logo Gold went from 12,400 to 13,200. Muka is still at 20. Prima Donna is still at 34. Ritmo is still at 945. Pogo went from 44 to 45. Dolce is still at 20. Stelina went from 17 to 19. Bellina went from 100 to 103. Metallo went from 198 to 189. Fumo went from 55 to 50. Pepperino went from 49 to 50. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching and see you later.